Okay, so I'll begin by thanking the organizers for having me over and also for putting this meeting up. So I'm going to talk about the fluctuations in a chain of active particles, and it's a work done in collaboration with Anupam Kundu from ICTS. Okay, so the central focus of my talk is going to be active matter. And by active, I mean a collection of particles such that every particle is driven out of equilibrium by some mechanism. So there's a drive that acts on each of these constituent particles. And as a result of this, there's a violation of detailed balance right at the local scale. If you look at the trajectory of an active particle, this is how they behave, which is different than that of a diffusing particle. So for diffusion, you see the trajectory is more erratic and more jittery, and the particle changes its direction very frequently. Whereas here, in the case of active particle, the particle has some reasonable likability to persist along some direction. So this property, by means of which the particle persists along some direction, is what I will refer to as activity. And the question that I would like to understand is, what are the ramifications of activity on the spatiotemporal properties of the particle? Or in other words, compared to the case of Brownian particles, what sort of differences do you get when the particles are active? Okay, so I'm going to address this question in the context of a harmonic chain of active particles. So you basically have a collection of particles which are active and they are interacting with their nearest neighbor by harmonic interaction. So if you look at this red particle here, you can write the Langevin equation for the particle in the overdamped limit. And on the right hand side, you see there are two parts shown in different colors. The blue part corresponds. The blue part arises due to the fact that it interacts with the nearest neighbors, whereas the red part arises because the particles are active. And I would like to understand the effect of interplay between interaction and activity on the properties of this ACT particle here, the red particle. So let me now come to this red term here, the active part. And had the particles been just diffusing particles, the red part would be the usual Gaussian white noise. However, for the case of active particles, the form is going to be different, and the precise form depends on the choice of models. So we looked at three different models of active particles. The first one is this run and tumble particle, for which the noise term has this sort of behavior here. V0 is a parameter which is constant, and sigma is a noise that alternates between two values at some rate. The second model that we looked at is the active Brownian particle, where the noise term has this sort of behavior, and the angle here performs Brownian dynamics. The third and the last model that we looked at is the active Ornstein-Uhlenbeck process, where the noise performs the Ornstein-Uhlenbeck dynamics. So these are the three models that I'm going to look at. And I would like to analyze the variance of the position of the TAC particle. I would like to look at the variance of this quantity X alpha for different models that I showed just now. And I would like to compare for different models and see how similar or how different they are, and also compare it with the case of diffusing particles. Okay, so before I delve into the interacting case, let me tell you what happens when the particles are non-interacting. This k is equal to 0. So first of all, in all the models that I showed, there's a parameter there which is called the active time scale, which essentially controls how active or not active the particle is. And depending on the value of this quantity here, you get different sort of behaviors. Here I've shown the result for the variance. If you are at times much larger than the active time scale, then you get this linear scaling of variance, and which is quite expected, because if you look at the trajectories of the active particles in this temporal regime, the trajectories are indistinguishable from that of a Brownian motion. So you get the diffusive scaling here. On the other hand, when your times are smaller than the active time scale, that's when the activity is more pronounced, and you get this nonlinear scaling here, characterized by the exponent b, which takes different value depending on the model. The values are listed here. But the main message that I would like to convey in this slide is that there's crossover of variance from this nonlinear t to the power b scaling to diffusive scaling at large times, and this crossover occurs at time scale of the order of activity time scale. Okay, so let me now come to what happens when there's interaction among the particles. First of all, in presence of interaction, there are three time scales in the problem, which is different than only one time scale that you had when they were non-interacting. So the first time scale comes because of the fact that there's interaction and particle will take some non-zero time to feel the presence of other particles, and this is that time scale, and it's related to the spring constant K here in this way. The second time scale is the activity time scale, which was also there in the non-interacting case, and which tells how active or not active the particle is. The third is even though we are dealing with a collection of particles, but the system size is finite, and there's a time scale associated to the finite system size, and it scales as n square, where n is the number of particles. So these are the three time scales in the problem, and we would like to focus in the regime where these time scales appear in this relative strength order. The interaction time scale is much smaller than the activity time scale, which in turn is smaller than the time scale due to the finiteness of the system. Okay, so let me now tell you what the results are, and I would like to draw your attention to this figure here. So first of all, recall that when the particles were non-interacting, there was crossover from this t to the power b scaling to this t scaling here, and there was a crossover function, that connected these two regimes. However, in presence of interaction, we get two additional regions here, this one and this one, okay, so let me now try to explain, these scaling regimes. The first one is this: when time is very smaller than the interaction time scale, then obviously the particle has not felt the presence of other particles, so they are effectively non-interacting. So you get this non-interacting scaling here, where b has different values depending on the model. However, when your time scale is larger than this interaction time scale, whereas that time the exponent is different since they are interacting, but in this case where the time scale is smaller than the active time scale, the particle is highly active there, and we get this t to the power a scaling here, where the value of a depends on the model, and I want to emphasize that this value a is different than the exponent b here, and h takes these values depending on the model. So this is the regime where particle is interacting as well as active. Now, when you go above this time scale, the particle is effectively just like Brownian particle, but also they are interacting, and you get this square root t kind of scaling behavior here. And when you have gone to much higher time scale, such that the system has felt the presence of all other particles, you recover this diffusing scaling. So there are 4 temp scaling regimes depending on which, depending on where you are. Okay, so that was the 4 scaling regimes. Now I would like to understand, what is the crossover function, that connects this regime from this regime. Here I have shown the plot of the variance for run and tumble particle. So you see, when time is very small, you have t to the power a scaling here. A here is 3/2 for this model. Whereas when you go to higher time scale, you have this square root t behavior. And what I would now like to understand is, what is the crossover function that connects these scaling regime here at small times to this regime here at larger times. So we were able to compute exactly the crossover function, and it's given by this boxed formula here. And this crossover function is a function of t by tau a. Tau a, remember, is the activity time scale, and it has this expression here where g is some complicated function, but whose form is precisely known to us. So this line here, the theory line here, it corresponds to this analytic form here. And just to show, here I have plotted this crossover function, and it's consistent with the simulation results also. And if you analyze the asymptotic regimes, you nicely recover these two scaling behaviors here. Okay, so now I would like to go to the other crossover function, which connects this t square root t behavior to the t behavior here. For this also, we could derive the form analytically, and it's shown here. And also the corresponding scaling function here is given here, and I would like to emphasize that this crossover function here is going to be different for different models of active particles, because we are dealing with the time scales which are of the order of TA. So this is going to be different. However, here we are well above this activity time scale, so this holds true for all the three models that I said. And at the top panel, you have the results for run and tumble particle, and at the bottom panel, you have the figure for active von Stenolenbeck process, and both are described by the same scaling function. Okay, so that was the story for the variance of the particle. Now we ask, how different particles are correlated, how the position of, say, this particle is correlated with the position of some another particle. So once again, we get different behavior depending on whether we are at times smaller than this activity time scale or larger than activity time scale. We get, and both of these temporal regimes are characterized by this sort of scaling function here, and we also have the analytic form of these scaling forms here. And to show that things are consistent with simulation, here I plotted this scaling function for smaller times and compared it for different values of time, and we see they converge perfectly with the analytic form. And same goes for the case when t is larger than the activity time scale. Okay, so I would like to conclude. So I will conclude with this figure. We studied a chain of active particles, and given this setup, we looked at the variance of the particles. Firstly, there are 3 time scales on the problem. This one is the interaction time scale. This one is the activity time scale. And the third is the time scale associated to the finite system size. And depending on which temporal regime you are at, you get different sort of behavior. And this is in contrast to the case where particles are non-interacting, where there's crossover from t to the power b scaling to this diffusive scaling. In presence of interaction, we get 2 additional temporal scaling regimes. We also looked at the crossover function that connected one scaling regime to the other. And we also looked at the correlation functions. We in our paper, in this paper of ours, we have also looked at the unequal time temporal correlation function. So with this, I will thank you for your attention and take if there are any questions. Thank you.
Yeah, the t to the half and t are both behaviors that one sees even for ordinary thermal particles, right? Kind of collection of
this one, you mean?
T to the half and t, yeah. Because, if a monomer in an ideal polymer chain, for instance, on time scales smaller than those on which it explores the whole chain, will do this thing which is equivalent to single file, and we'll get t to the half. And then long times you'll get t. The other regimes are clearly special to your case, but can you point to where the fact that these are broken detail balance systems really comes out? Because you could imagine a system which is thermal and which has colored noise and memory in the damping, and both agree. Okay. In such a system, you could easily get non-trivial mean square displacement exponents, but it could still be equilibrium. So have you measured any quantities such as, I don't know, Harada-Sasa difference, or some quantity that actually is a
signature of activity, you mean?
Signature of broken detail balance, rather than, because even if you go back to your beginning of your talk, you compared ordinary random walks and these persistent guys.
Yeah.
Actually, if you look at a molecule in a gas where everybody, inertia is important, you'll see something more like the right-hand one, and that's still equilibrium. If you look at that process and you play it back, the question is, what is different about playing backward in time versus forward in time? So it's a question of what quantities you'd measure. It might be more fun with these systems.
Yeah, I mean,
measure some diagnostics of broken time reversal.
Okay, so
which mean square displacement won't tell you by itself.
Yeah, I agree. But I think
just a thought.
I don't know. I mean, I would guess maybe one can look at quantities like some virial things and see.
Yeah, or fluctuation, dissipation differences or ratios as a function of frequency. Because most likely in all these systems, what will happen is that the departure from detail balance will be most noticeable at some intermediate frequency scale. So if you resolve the entropy production or something into, if you bin it by frequency and measure something like that Harada-Sasa thing is one example. I mean, somehow it would be fun to pull out.
Yeah. I mean, we didn't look at that.
But just a comment. It's not really a.
Yeah. So probably I have missed it. So B you have mentioned in some cases it can be 4.
Yeah.
Do you have any understanding of from where such strong super ballistic thing is coming?
I mean, even here it's super ballistic. I think it's because of the kind of noise that is there. It need not be active also. Like you can get super ballistic scaling even in other systems. Like for example, random acceleration process. If you look, scaling is super ballistic. It scales as T cube. Yeah, yeah.
I have a question. Why do you have tau n? Like
Why we have what?
tau n? Like why should there be dependence on the number of particles?
No, because there's finite number of particles, right? If you take n going to infinity, then obviously this time won't be there. However, there are actually when you do simulation,
actually, what is like meaning? You're just saying finite system size. So like
yeah, this is basically the time scale that particle needs in order to feel the presence of all other particles.
It's like the slowest Rouse mode.
Yeah.
That's one way in it n square.
Yeah. It scales as n square.
So this is on a ring, right?
Yeah.
It's on a 60, then probably it should saturate.
Yeah. I mean, it's on the ring in the sense that two n particles, I mean, interact with each other. But I mean, we don't do that modulo L thing. We don't do modulo L thing.
Right, you don't do.
Yeah.
So that's why it diffuses. Right?
Yeah.
Otherwise, it should saturate.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, this probably will change if you consider some other boundary conditions.
So like it's a fixed state, it should saturate.
Yeah. Yeah, that's what I'm saying. So this probably will change, but these scaling regimes will remain intact. I mean, because here we are effectively taking n going to infinity, and their boundary condition, I don't think will make any impact, right?
This crossover happens at.
Yeah, crossover probably will depend, but at the, I mean, if
it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
And one other, okay, maybe I think we have run out of time. Stop. So let's thank Prashant.